Recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 588. My name is Eric Nelson. With me today, I have my co-host, Corey Romero. Corey, how you doing today?
Eric, doing well. Beautiful weather here in Utah. It's starting to warm up a little bit, so happy as can be. How are you?
I'm doing great. The weather in California has been crystal clear. The rain has passed through, and we're getting some nice sunny days. So the color of the bay is nice turquoise green and flat today. So beautiful day. On the show today, we have Michael Roy. We're going to be talking to Michael about M1, the Mac M1s. The new M1s came out, and I got some over Christmas. They're really great, and we haven't had Michael on in I think 8 or 9 months. So we'd like to get an update on where things are with regards to these amazing new machines. I know the old machines were in beta, so we'll talk to Michael in a little bit about what's happening with Mac, Fusion, and all things desktop. Before we go there, Corey Romero, I know that VExperts are right in the thick of getting their final apps, and any other news there?
Yeah, a couple of things. So applications have actually been extended until January 28th. So we had a little bit of a bug, which was causing some users not being able to go in and apply correctly. So we've gone through that, tracked down those users, emailed everyone, and extended the date out to the 28th. Now, the announcement date is still the same. So the announcement date is still set for February 25th. We're actually going to aim for sooner than then. And if we do, we ended up announcing before then, obviously we'll let everybody know. Emails will go out. The 2021 VExperts, if you're a 2021 VExpert, your application for the 2022 program will be auto-renewed. So we are auto-renewing. I did have a lot of conversations with a lot of VExperts all over the United States as well as the world, and there are still a lot of people not able to meet in person, to do in-person events. There's some digital stuff going on, but that doesn't cover everybody's activities. So we are going to offer that for VExperts again this year. And then on top of that, a couple of upcoming webinars we have for VExperts. January 19th, we've got CloudBot, which is custom cloud integration and automation. And then on January 25th with VMware, we've got VMware Skyline Pro or Skyline Advisor Pro webinar for the VExperts. So looking forward to that, and definitely looking forward to the 2022 VExpert Awards.
Awesome. Just a shout out as well to the Influencer 100 members that got their plaques over the last, I think, 30 days. I think they all started showing up. We got those done, funded, and out the door. And we are working on announcing the next somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or so Influencer 100 members. Those memberships are good for 3 years. Shout out to Noel Greer for getting that all done. And if you're part of that program, or you got an invite for the next year's program, we'll again add some number per year, somewhere under 50 per year. Get into that program. Runs for 3 years. Shout out to everybody that got their plaques, and thanks for all the hard work that all the Influencer 100 guys do for us. So with that, I don't think I have any other news. So Michael Roy, welcome back to the show. We always start out with give us the 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch of who you are and what do you do at VMware. How long have you been here? And then we'll get into what's new with the M1s.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. And Corey, great to see you in the as much in the flesh as we can get these days. So Michael Roy, my title is Product Marketing Manager. Effectively, I'm the product lead for VMware Fusion and VMware Workstation. I also help out with VMware Photon OS. I maintain the docs, and I help with the GitHub repo and things like that. So this is year 13 for me at VMware, coming up in around June. So been here for a long time. I've basically been with Fusion and Workstation almost my entire stint here. I took some time and I did technical marketing for our cloud services when we had vCloud Air, and went over to Fusion and Workstation to try and see what we can do to cloudify the products and bring them into the modern sort of app dev realm. Where historically these products were very useful for developers, and what is development now is totally changed, and Workstation and Fusion are moving forward in that direction.
Nice. I gotta say, over the holidays, I did get myself a new M1 Air, right? And I think the best laptop I've ever been on, right? Like just crazy good, right? Like from a speed perspective, graphics is fine. I'm not a giant gamer on my Mac. I primarily use it for code and work. And then I got my wife an M1 Pro, right, with a little extra memory and the ports and stuff. Gotta say, super impressed with the new design of them. The no longer the sharp edges, and so that you can hold it up without the square edges on the Pros. I really like metal cases, everything great. But the M1 processor, wow, holy smokes! I don't think I've ever been on such a quick machine. I don't know. You might have already had these things. I know last time we talked, they kind of had the first versions of the M1s out. They didn't have the new ones out yet, and you had said hold back because the new ones are going to be coming and they're going to be for real. What's your thoughts on this as the year has progressed? What's your thoughts on the new machines?
Yeah, likewise. I'm a big fan of the design. I have my gripes with the design a little bit, but overall I'm very happy. I think it's funny because you look at my old Intel machine here, which is nice and thin, and then this M1 device, which is much more powerful, but also way better from a thermal perspective, performance per watt, and it's a little thicker. So it's a little weird when you moving in that direction, because Apple had moved in this direction of making everything manila envelope ready, and that's why, before we were starting, I mentioned I think that the MacBook Air is the quintessential, the ultimate, the best Mac that they've ever created, because it has that processor which is incredible. It doesn't have as many cores on it and whatnot, but in the demos that I was doing with Fusion and when we launched the Fusion Tech Preview there, I was throwing down like 8 cores, 6 to 8 cores, 4 cores per VM, and like 10 VMs at once, and with 8 gigs of RAM on a machine that only had 16 gigs of RAM, and the thing just never skipped a beat. And so now I have, what I'm on right now is a 16-inch M1 Max Pro, the top end with 64 gigs of RAM, and I can't max this thing out. Very rarely are there instances where I can actually do stuff and it like peg it, and that's like compiling the Linux kernel in a VM and doing stuff like that. So it's really nuts how far they've come, but also because they're so thermal, they're effectively the thermal profile is so much lower. I can sit out on the porch with the machine on my lap in the sun and get work done and feel great about it. Whereas my Intel machine, that would never happen. Even my my Linux and my PC, I got my workstation machine over here, my good old Dell XPS. It's a great piece of kit, but you can't put it on your lap outside for very long, right? These things make it so that you can do whatever kind of work you do from anywhere, and it's funny. Really a testament to their engineering effort.
I have an XPS as well, right? And that thing gets so hot that the video card throttles itself, right? Like it takes it down by 50% CPU. Yeah. GPU performance because it just gets too hot, right? And,
my Intel machine, my Intel Mac, when I've got that thing plugged into my 4K display, it's just you just hear the fans screaming.
Right.
These things, I don't think I've ever gotten the fans running on them yet.
Yeah, the M1s. I wasn't even sure the Air has a fan. I don't know. I don't think it does. Right. I'm not sure it does. I've never heard it.
So the Air doesn't, but the Pros do. Yeah.
Right. Great. So, been amazing. And then that translates to energy usage, wattage, and then battery life. Right. Like battery life. It's like I'm using my phone when I'm using a computer. Right. Like I don't really think about my battery when my phone is on. I'll think about charging it once a day, maybe once every other day when it's new. And by the time the battery gets old, it's once a day, but that's it. I don't sit around thinking about charging my phone. The M1 Air, it's the same thing, right? Like I don't even think about the battery. Every once in a while I go, oh, I think I'm down to a quarter tank. I better stop by the gas station and get some gas, right? So crazy how efficient that guy is. And like you say, multi-core. I bring up the performance meters and nothing, right? Like just a flat line. Maybe one of the CPUs is busy when I'm doing stuff, but if I open up lots of videos, do everything, nothing there. This gets in.
But your point is spot on though, which is that you don't really need to think about battery anymore. I could be down to 5% and I'm I still got an hour potentially,
right.
Depending on what you're doing, right?
Right. And if I close the laptop and then come back 3 days later, it's still at, exactly where it was when I shut it, right? Like that.
And it's up before you even finish opening the laptop lid.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no lag there, and the same thing when you plug in an external display. It's just it's there.
Not that this is supposed to be the Apple M1 show or anything, but I would say that, and I know that it got thicker, but for me, they increased the keyboard depth now by like a quarter mm or something, and like I wanted that back, right? So now the keys, I'm not banging on the keys anymore. Corey, I know that when we joked about when we had the Intel 15s, you would sit in a room and it was like clackety 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 clack while we were working together in a room somewhere, and I used to look at you annoyed because I'd have the old laptop. It was
You would too.
the keyboard depth, right? Just was annoying on the old, and they've managed to fix that. They put the HDMI port back on. They put the SD card back on. They didn't give me a USB A. That would have been nice, right? But they did give us 3 USB Cs on these guys. So, super nice. So power,
but by the same token, like I think that what is nice that has happened in the industry is that Intel has taken note and is very much trying to, at the very least from their marketing stuff, you can see them doing direct comparisons. They've got a new i9 out or coming out that has a not performance per watt, but overall performance that, outpaces it in certain benchmarks. And of course, there's always big asterisks in how they're benchmarking it and whatnot. But it's great. The rising tide is lifting all the boats. And if that means we're going to get more performant and more battery efficient chips out of Intel and AMD, everybody wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about the design that I know, it's a trade-off, is that I didn't like the super thin because, I'm older and fatter. And so holding on to those little thin things are hard for my little fat fingers, right? Like I like the idea that I have something that has a little weight on it that I can carry. Like I don't, but I do have the Air, right? And it is thin, right? But I do like my wife's that is the Pro, because it does feel like you have a little bit more to hold on to, right? And I know that's kind of weird, but that's I do like I knew the keyboard depth and the design. I do like the square edges because they're easier to hold on to. I don't drop it as much.
And I do like the display as well. Like the display's got the nice rounded corners on the inside, on the top, so it feels like it's a nice package. And at the same time, on the higher end models, it's got that ProRes display with the high refresh rate, that 120 hertz refresh rate, which apps haven't been updated for it, so you don't notice it everywhere. But when you notice it, it's just butter. It's just butter.
Right. Now, the other thing that I struggled with before I made the purchase was like, Intel apps that I have, old apps that I have. I got a bunch of code that I've written over the time that are my favorite little things that I've compiled. And I was worried that, none of this was going to work. But the Rosetta emulation mode that they have is seamless, right? Like I haven't had any issues with old things that I had that I can run. I've been able to install old Intel apps, right? Like, x86, I guess, apps that I didn't think were going to even install because it would say, oh, this is an M1. Sorry, I can't install you. But no, it installed and it came up and it ran without any issue whatsoever. So I got to say their emulation mode, I didn't even know about it, but that kind of gives us a bridge over until everybody's compiled onto, the ARM architecture.
Yeah, which sadly is taking a little longer than I think everybody would have wanted. There's still a bunch of holdout apps that aren't fully ready there on the Arch 64 platform. Like Dropbox, I think, was one of them, and I know like OneDrive had just released an internal beta that's got native support, and there's a couple other holdouts here and there. I'll be happy when Global Protect gets there. At least our VPN solution right now, it's running under Rosetta. But what's really clever is, again, this is back to the testament to the union of the hardware and the software, the things that you can only do when you have a tight coupling of the two of them, which is Apple did this really interesting thing with regards to memory order and the way that memory is stored in a quote emulated environment. Specifically, there's this concept called total store order, which is how you order the arrangement of memory addressing in layman's terms. And in Intel, it's a certain way, and in ARM, the spec is a certain way. Well, what Apple did is they took that spec and they sort of flipped it on its head, and they made it feel and look and behave in the same order that Intel does. So when they're running Intel apps, they don't have to reorder all of the memory. They can just sort of load it up like in one big chunk, and it makes it happen a lot quicker. So you don't have that in generally when emulation happens, you have this issue called context switching, which is when you're going from an Intel process to an ARM process,
Right.
it has to load up all the memory for that ARM process, and that job takes a bunch of work. It takes several CPU cycles and a bunch of memory cycles to do it, and that's why emulation in general.
You get that lag.
Yeah, it's got the lag, right? That's the
memory.
CPU has to, you're driving a truck, and on the back of that truck is like another car,
Right.
and so what they did, like I said, is really clever. They made the order of all that memory aligned so that when the only real lag that you have is just loading up Rosetta, and then once Rosetta is loaded, all the apps just sort of feel it, just like they do on an Intel machine.
Yeah, it's kind of just like a VM strategy, right? Where you just have the VM that's there, it runs, and your stuff runs perfectly. Right? Like, I gotta say, they must be doing something creative with their memory too, because not just talking about Intel versus M1 or the chip architecture, but that I really worried because I was only getting a 16 gig memory, machine, right? But like for some reason, the OS footprint per memory is lower. My apps seem to be lower. Like I haven't consumed the 16 gig at all, right? Like I don't know what they're doing to squeeze the performance out of. That's like, are they doing memory compression? I don't know what they're doing.
It's nuts. Yeah, some of it is compression. Some of it is very high throughput, like swapping. Basically, it's not swap how you kind of know and feel it in Linux, right? It's got this special cache channel, and again, that's back to the the magic of being able to marry the hardware and the software together, whereby you have these hardware pipelines that can be leveraged in the software, right? So when I was doing the demos with Fusion when we first got the M1 device, I could throw down 10 VMs. Each VM would have 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM on a 16 gig machine with only 8 cores available. And they all ran fast. And like, not just like, they ran okay. I mean, they ran fast, like as fast as my iMac Pro beside me. And so, yeah, I mean, they are doing very clever stuff in the memory space that we just don't notice. And I should say, the notice thing that we do have is that everything just works.
Yeah, that's where, and I've been telling people that, like, yeah, don't worry about how much memory you're buying on your laptop. Like half what you would think you would need, and you're probably still ahead of the game, right? Because
I would have been fine having chosen 32 on my machine. I got 64, and I don't think I've ever had it over 20 gigs consumed.
I got the 16, Air, and it was fine. But I was really worried because buying my wife, she'll ride with this for like 8 years, right? Like we drive these laptops till they're dead, and I was really worried. So I was like, okay, I paid extra because they come out of the box, at all the retail places. It's with just 16 gig as well, right? Like everything is standard 16 gig, and I had to order online, and you pay an extra $450 to get the extra 16 gig in it, and I did, and I kind of look at going, I probably didn't need to do that, right? Because this stuff is so efficient, right?
Yeah, and you're used to how you sort of spec things out in an Intel mindset, right? Which is like, I have more apps, more memory, do it, right?
Right. I mean, I do kind of like, this is going to reset my training, because when I get interns in, I'll sit them down and I'll train them on computer architecture, because a lot of times we get the marketing interns and they haven't spent a lot of time in computer science yet. So I'll go through and I'll give them the standard. Okay, your OS, OS is going to take 1 gig, maybe 2 gig, right? Your application space is going to take X. Here's how much Photoshop's going to take. They're like, so I'll give them the memory consumption. So basically you're going to, to run a small machine, you're going to have a minimum of 8 gig here, right? And I'll lay that out. And I feel like I have to relearn that now, because like I think that I kind of cut all those numbers in half when we're talking M1s. Speaking of then, okay, so where are we going with regards to then Fusion and Workstation? Now we're talking about M1s here, but like when we're talking about, I think you were telling me a little bit about, we got Linux out here, we have developers out here. Where do you think we're going with regards to Fusion? Because the old Fusion, obviously it was to run Windows on top of your Mac. That was a big use case. There were other ones. Where are we going with regards to Fusion and M1?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been fluid, the past year or so. There are challenges both on the technical side as well as from a licensing and a legal sort of perspective, right? Right now, you cannot buy a copy of Windows for ARM. There's no way you can do that. A license for x86 might activate it, but that activation doesn't necessarily mean you're in compliance with the license itself. The license for Windows on ARM very explicitly, if you read it, it's written in like 4 different locations, so you have to sort of piece it together. But It very explicitly says it's only supported on devices that come with it pre-installed, which is a Qualcomm CPU inside of a Surface device. Explicitly, if you look at their documentation, it's like we do not support M1. M1 is not supported in a whole bunch of different places, not in like the legalese, but in their sort of documentation.
Right. So they're basically doing Windows for Surfaces right now.
Right. That's exactly it. And so they have their own emulation layer, so they can run x86 apps. It's unclear how long they're going to keep that around for. And by the same token, it's if you are able to get Windows 11 installed on an M device, which there's a way to do it, both in Fusion and in competing products, you sort of give up control over your updates. You have to sign up for the Insider program, which is not a production-worthy license or use, and it will just accept any update that Microsoft provides, which means they could break it like at any point in time without warning. So it's great. It's not bad if you're doing hobby stuff. If you just you want to play some games and whatever, party down. But if you're actually a company that's supporting a fleet of users, it puts you in this kind of a gray area. And so there's been some talks about maybe Microsoft opening up their licensing and having that, something that anybody can just go ahead and buy and install as a virtual machine and have that as a supported use case. We're hoping they change course and they make that available. Right now, they've been pretty silent about it. Whereas the competitor kind of says, hey, it works, but your licensing is your responsibility, sort of negating the fact that there actually is no viable license for this use case. Right. So we have a bigger business than just running Windows on a Mac. So for us, we're looking at it with a different lens. Right. So that's where, we've put a lot of effort into making Linux first class experience. So and part of that involves working with the open source community. So we've got changes that we've put into Linux, the kernel itself. Our graphics drivers got put into 5.14 kernel. So anything newer than that, they've got our VMware GFX drivers, and they can give you resolutions, high DPI, all that good stuff. It's not 3D hardware accelerated. That's second order function, but it looks great, runs very performant. And likewise, tools. We have OpenVM tools. So that was largely put together from help with the ESXi ARM team, because there's a whole, running ESX on Raspberry Pis and these new ARM, these smaller form factors, right? So we share a lot of code with that. The teams work very closely together on it. It's the same hypervisor, right? And so it's been a thing where, so we've got Linux, we've got a variety of flavors that work out of the box, like Fedora is really great, OpenSUSE is really great. Ubuntu is fine and dandy. There's some bugs with 2204 that we're working through. It's just kernel stuff, but we figured it out. We'll get there. It's not a big deal. For OpenBSD, big shout out to my good friends in the OpenBSD community. There's a lot of love there. We love it, or in the FreeBSD community. I started on FreeBSD before I got into Linux back in late 90s, early 2000s. So I have a soft spot for the little devil there. But yeah, it presents this problem where you're used to Windows on the Mac, and what does that mean now, right? So if Microsoft opens up their licensing, it'll be a different conversation.
That's an interesting, what you articulated, which is if you look at the trend over time, Linuxes have slowly been creeping into the developer space, right? Like, I mean, back when we probably started with VMware 14 years ago, Windows probably had 80 to 90% of what you were running in the data center, and Linux was kind of creeping in, right? And certainly people were building lots of Windows apps. Now, if I were to guess, I would say that probably Linux is probably 60% of workloads are probably being deployed out on Linux servers, right? You're shaking your head no, so yeah.
I think it's like 90.
90%. Okay, so
just think about this. It's the cloud. Everything in the cloud is Linux.
Yeah, that's right.
So you don't run a Windows server in the cloud, and if you do, you're generally running it for on-prem related stuff. And if you are running Windows Server in the cloud for cloud things, I'd like to talk to you because that's a very interesting use case. But yeah, no, it's Amazon's Linux, Google's Linux, everybody's Linux nowadays, whether you know it or like it or not.
Right. So it really, in a real sense, then we're giving you the ability to run your Linuxes on your M1 Macs, just like we gave you the ability to run Windows back in the day on your Intel Macs, right? And that makes sense. That's a great use case for us because we make it run smooth and nice, or I think you do, right? And that's what you need. You want to have graphics drivers. You want your Linux to be able to come up, but I still want to run my Mac. I don't want to have my Linux and my. I'll take a single Mac that runs both, and that's a perfectly great space for Fusion to be.
Yeah, I think that one of the great challenges of our time, and for folks that are working in the industry right now, is, the proliferation of cloud services means that you have to have different environments all the time. Whether those environments are remote or whether they're virtual machines on your local machine, you need to have an environment that looks and feels like where your code's going to run. Even if your code is just a container, that still needs a certain level of a Linux kernel and things like that to run. And so, what Fusion is fantastic for is it gives you that local report, that local environment that can have any type of cloud inside of it. In Intel, of course, we can run ESX inside of it, so we can run a whole vSphere data center inside of a bunch of VMs, and likewise we can run a bunch of VMs that look like Amazon instances that have Docker inside of them and container. And then further to that, now we have this whole Kubernetes space where it's just like vSphere but for containers, and being able to run that locally, there's a lot of value there too. So we think that, as we move forward, we want to make it so that working with the cloud feels local. It feels like, so when we look at how these sort of use cases play out, we have what we call the inner loop and the outer loop. And the inner loop is where you're sitting there doing your code, doing your development, you're writing stuff, you're building it, you're checking it out locally, seeing if it does what you want it to do, what its intentions are. And then, when you're happy with that, you commit it to your source code repository. And then that's when the outer loop takes over. And it does a bunch of automated stuff to like build your container images or build your packages, whatever your deliverables are, and then push those out into production if you get into the whole DevOps CI/CD type of space. And so, we want that. Right now, there's a bunch of thorns that are along the way if you're trying to do that type of inner development. And there's a bunch of tools that are trying to solve this in different ways, and some of them are working together, some of them are competing. But I think that if you look at our ethos, which is sort of to be this neutral player and support the best of breed tools, whatever it is, that's really where I think we want to get going. Is that we want to abstract away the hard stuff, deploying the VM. That part is boring. What we want to do is get to this value of how can I quickly go from idea to code to prototype to production and have that all there, because we have all this great technology in Tanzu, the application service that just came out, Tanzu application platform. It checks your images inside of a repository, make sure that they're of a certain spec, they meet a bunch of criteria, and then you can go ahead and pull those down into your local machine with the assurance that it's not going to have the vulnerabilities, like this version's got the log4j thing patched, and and I don't have to worry about doing that myself because that got taken up upstream. So, there's a lot of problems there that need solving, and we think that Fusion and Workstation by extension is, ideally positioned to kind of take that on. And at the same time, having one tool that not only provides you this runtime, but also provides you an environment to test different clients in, right? So I need to test my Windows browsers. I need to test, Mac. I need to test, potentially Linux. I need to test an API. All that stuff can be done using a single tool. And that's sort of where our head's at. Now, of course, back on the Microsoft thing, if, even if Microsoft, doesn't come out and provide everybody with a Windows license that, everyone can buy and use and whatever, I still think we're going to look at offering support for that as a platform. There's a few holdouts right now. VMware Tools is one. The other one being network. The network driver used to be included with Windows. Now it's not out of the box, so we have to figure out how to resolve that. And then just, more official support for things that Windows 11 has requirements for, like TPM, for example. So there's work underway to get the TPM device, the Trusted Platform Module, which is a security chip, getting that working properly in ARCH64, which we currently don't have. So yeah, it feels like a little bit like Wild Wild West all over again, where everything got flipped upside down. We have cloud, we have new processor architectures, and it creates all this wonderful opportunity for us.
Yeah, it does, because everybody's dealing with this as they purchase their new M1, right? Like they get to deal with this. They're now some of it's in enterprise. I'm curious to see where are enterprise when it comes to M1 on the desktop, right? Like I know that I don't even think VMware really allows me to get the M1 apples quite yet, right? Like, so where are they? Because I think that a lot of times we're working with enterprises, and so we respond to enterprises as well.
Yeah, from the Fusion and Workstations perspective, we're about half and half. Half of our customers are enterprise, half of our customers are everybody else. And and to your point about the M1 devices at VMware, actually, I actually work with IT a little bit to get Fusion standardized in the internal images. We have 30,000 employees or 35,000 employees or whatever, and Fusion is installed on every single Mac. And so now that as of today, you can actually go ahead and order an M1 device through VMware and have it officially imaged and with the proper VMware packaging and all of our Nannyware stuff that we put on.
Congratulations! That's not why we had you on today. It was not to celebrate that we can now buy M1s from IT here, but.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point about what are enterprises doing? I think enterprises took a bit of a gradual approach. I don't think everybody just went in whole hog and said, hey, let's jump in like they would with an Intel Mac, because there are these architectural limitations, both in terms of the software that a corporation needs to have installed on the machine to secure it and keep it locked down and managed, but also just app compatibility. But I think that what I'm hearing from customers is that they're moving more and more in this direction now. They have traditionally had a bunch of Macs. Everybody wants to update to the new Mac. And of course, the number one question that I get is, when can I run Intel Windows on M1 Macs? And it's a tough conversation to have, because the answer is you can't. The answer is, you can't asterisk. And that asterisk is, there's emulation. QEMU has there's a fork of it that folks have made it work. And yeah, it'll boot, but it's not something that you want to use day to day. The performance is not. You would pull your hair out using this thing for a day.
Well, not like that, but you would be chasing constantly updates, and it would just be impossible for IT to kind of support that at scale, right?
Yeah, and that's going to kill your battery. You're running an emulated process. It's got to do, like I was saying, how clever Apple was with Rosetta and their memory order. Now take that back to where you don't have any of that and you're just trying to raw CPU all of this stuff. Right. It doesn't perform as users would expect it to. And it's kind of a bummer, but at the same time, this is the cost of progress. And for us, so we look at we look at Fusion on M devices as future leaning. We're not trying to run every legacy app in the past. We're trying to set these up so that they can be the development environment of the future, because we're going to see more ARM devices in the data center. We're seeing more in the cloud already. I think that there's some hardware vendor stuff that's got to sort of get there, but there's these great standardization efforts that have gone on, which have been what has helped x86 be successful back in the past. Things like ISA and PCI, such that manufacturers can build the hardware because there's a standard and there's a spec that they can build against, and they know that will support the CPU, and it'll all work nice. So there's similar efforts happening in the ARM space. Right. This thing called System Ready. And so VMware Fusion's virtual hardware profile is a system-ready compatible profile. And that basically means that there's a certain set of, certain set of characteristics of the virtual machine or the hardware's profile that have to be in place for it to receive that, that ARM inside checkbox, so to speak. And with that, now hardware manufacturers, if they design against that spec, they know that it's going to work. Their apps are going to work. The drivers aren't going to behave crazily different depending on the hardware. Right, so that's relatively new, and I think that hardware manufacturers are going to start picking that up.
Has anyone ever been able to make that work, though? Right, like this reminds me of trying to get OSs to be compliant on phones, right? Android versions. Back in the day, there was other operators where you make a standard, you hold everybody to the standard, and then you try to get everybody to build, a compliant,
Yeah, it's funny. There's an XKC in typical IT fashion. There's an XKCD comic for everything, and there's one about this, which is like there's 12 competing standards, and this is not appropriate. So we're going to fix this problem tomorrow. There are now 13 competing standards, right? And ad nauseum. And so but I would counter that with we did that, and it was very successful. And I mean we like we as an industry. UEFI, right? EFI is a consortium that came together that said, hey, this is what a bootloader needs to do and needs to behave like. PCI,
Yeah, we have
ISA, all that stuff is very foundational. Without which you'd end up with like, think of Apple back in the day where you had Apple connector this and different dongle that and different adapters that were only within the Apple ecosystem. Now imagine that's Asus, HP, Dell, Lenovo. Everybody had their own. You'd only ever be able to buy a machine from one company. And so that type of stuff opened up the playing field such that OEMs could get on board. And now that we're seeing that happen out of the ARM space, I'm hoping that accelerates the the hardwares that come out.
And back to the M1, it's like what I would also say is Steve Jobs had a quote that went, yeah, you're going to have to support us because consumers are going to want these products and then they're going to force you to do it. And I would say after this holiday season, looking at I was actually really surprised Apple doesn't even sell the x86 anymore. They have them if you bother them. They
No, they do. You can't. The Mac Pro is still x86.
I got it, but go to the showroom, right, and see what they're selling. Try to find an x86 in the showroom floor, right, or find a salesman that even talks about it. It's like they are selling the M1s now full up. You can't even find an x86 in there now, right, in their lineup. And what that means is that the volume, and now take into account guys like me are saying, wow, these are fantastic, right? These machines are amazing. That's going to drive volume, and then volumes get, that's going to drive IT, right? Because IT is going to have to respond to. It's kind of like the iPhone when it first came out. Every IT was like, no, we do BlackBerry. That's what we do. And then 2 years later, everybody had to realize that no, you have to support iPhones because people want mail on their iPhones now. And IT,
and 10 years after that, now the BlackBerry, they literally turned it off.
Turned it off. Yep. Yeah, and so I think that will drive successive products drive also behavior, right?
I agree, and I think what it also has done is shown everybody what is possible, right? And it's funny because we've been so stuck in this like Intel centric world of like more cores and more gigahertz and bigger caches but it's the same architecture and they just been sort of bolting on more and more and more over time, right? It's like the Boeing 747 Max or whatever. Like the jet engine was great, but now it's got this gigantic monstrous thing around it just to make it hit those performance benchmarks. And so I think what it's done is it's given everybody a visibility into what's possible with respect to like the total power consumption, the TDW of a chip, how much power it can consume, how much performance it can have, and what the thermal profile of that looks like. So the performance per watt is so efficient that if you translate that into the data center, suddenly there's this huge value of energy cost savings and workload cost savings in the cloud. And I think that, like I said, once hardware starts becoming more available, compiling apps for ARM that are currently running x86 isn't all that crazy. With Fusion, it's different because we talk directly to the CPU stuff and we need to do very unique things down there. But compilers have solved this problem a long time ago, and thank goodness for the Raspberry Pi community, because there was this huge influx of interest in, because you had this credit card sized device that is actually pretty powerful, or powerful enough to do a lot of things. Like a couple years ago, I spent a holiday with my nephew and we built a little arcade box out of one, and it was a whole ton of fun.
Yep.
So I think that a lot of the problems have been solved. It's just a matter of a little bit of time, and everything's going to sort of continue to coalesce. And we're also very visible of that industry moving, right? Like I had wished that we were a little quicker out to market with Fusion. And I certainly, even this year, we're going to be making some updates and, they're going to be great. It would be lovely if we had those last year, but these are strange times. And, I think that the market also hasn't been moving where everyone thought it was going to at the pace. Like when these Apple devices came out, everyone like, oh, like they're going to see this huge avalanche of ARM devices, but now we have supply chain shortages. So I think there's a will there, but once those sort of floodgates start to open up, it'll be a whole new era of computing. And I for one, am very happy to be a part of it.
You have a good point. The whole COVID supply chain availability has slowed innovation down. There's no question about it, right? Like it put it in 50% mode speed, right? Which is great because it allows everybody to absorb this and catch up. So I think that's good. But I also think that Apple has moved the needle. If we talk about cloud and AWS and other cloud vendors, right? It is interesting that I know they have an ARM capability. When we start talking power consumption is one of their biggest expenses, right? Like, and so that'll be interesting to see how the efficiency of ARM CPUs with regard to power consumption actually plays out into choosing cloud service, right? Because that affects price. Price is everything when you're talking about that. And as long as apps run, and Apache, all the Nginx, all the infrastructure components can compile on both of those, no problem. That's all been done, right? So now you're really looking at operating expenses that drive that, right, and availability from the cloud vendors. But they can go start buying ARM, set it up, deliver to customers.
Yeah, it's really opened things up, and again, back to the idea of seeing what's possible, right? When you do the math and you look at like, holy crap, like instead of 140 watts, I can do this with 45, like that
Right.
changes the math equation of the value of the platform. And with the cloud and the internet, you don't necessarily need some of the things that have been baked into x86. And by that I mean like local graphics, for example, like games, things that are running locally don't have the same requirements of things that are going to run in the cloud. Like to your point, in the cloud, you just have Apache, Nginx, and load balancing, and that's all command line server oriented stuff that you only see through the lens of a web page, and that is completely cross platform. So yeah, I once these supply chain things open up, I think people are going to start looking at a cloud ARM devices in the cloud, ARM cloud instances, and also in the data center, just to reduce cost of internal operations.
Yeah, not that I want to bang on Pat Gelsinger and Intel too hard, because I certainly like him a lot, right? And so I wish x86 well, but certainly they have, I don't know if it's an architectural issue or just implementation issue with regards to power consumption and speed. But I know they had 8 micron or nano, I forget what the
Nanometer,
nanometer versus Apple getting down to the 6 or 5 or 4. Yeah, 4, right?
I think, and their next one's supposed to be 3.
Right. And I think that's really what it just comes down to, is that they're just ahead of that curve. And then x86 large instruction sets are a little bit bigger, heavier, right? So interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of legacy that x86 is trying to keep around as well, as opposed to ARM, where they really have ARM v6, ARM v7, ARM v8, whatever. They can eschew the past and kind of move forward without having to hang on to all that stuff, and do the backwards compatibility. So that gives them a lot more ability to go faster. But what I will say is, Pat, I love the guy. I very much miss our one-on-ones when he was at VMware. I used to give him an annual briefing on the state of desktop, and he was always so very supportive of it. But what I will say is, I'm very pleased and excited to see that there's a lot more investment in the fab. A lot more investment in the manufacturing itself. They're trying to open more fab centers in the States, which I am very happy about. I think that having that being distributed is much safer, much more resilient than having everything relying on one region in the world, which could be disrupted out of our control, and suddenly we have more than just a supply chain crisis.
Right.
So I'm very eager to see that move forward, and they're doing great. And Intel's not going anywhere. Like it's not like Intel's going to go anywhere, right?
I'm waiting also to see whether they get into fabbing ARMs for people as well, right? Like I got to assume that they're going to just jump into the ARM business as well, right? So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, right.
I think the challenge comes to, back to one of our earlier points of the speed of adoption, supply chain stuff. Another looming question is this ARM acquisition, right? Like ARM incorporated ARM Holdings as a company. They're like a British company. They were owned by a Japanese company for a while, SoftBank, and then they're selling them off, and then Nvidia might be buying them. And then there's all this regulatory challenges with that, and so I think everyone's sort of playing a little bit of a wait and see until that settles. Before they dive in whole hog in respect to the OEMs and the manufacturing stuff, because it's unclear what's going to happen to licensing, because basically that's all ARM Holdings is they have the license for the chip, and then they license it to anybody who wants to manufacture it, right?
Which Which for me, then, if we start talking about edge, right, and like what's out on the edge, what's in my cell towers now, right? I think it's all going ARM, right? That would be my guess, right? That the systems out in your cell towers and the next generation cloud will be, out at the edge, right? And so,
No, you're totally right.
Right, we'll go ARM. I think but it'll be custom ARM for the particular job that it needs to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, like VMware well understands that. And so we have, a bunch of solutions that are focused on that in the telco space. And one of those things is close to what I do on the Photon OS project is, Photon OS 4, which came out last year, I want to say, February, I think. It's
Right.
It has a real-time Linux kernel, which is a little different than a normal one. Is that it's designed to sort of be aware of the physical time instead of the CPU counting time, which is a little different. And it also has a radio area network control and drivers and tools for. So really, it's you take that Photon, you can put it on your edge device. That edge device can serve your edge network both for 5G telco use cases as well as sort of endpoint use cases.
All right, neat.
And on ARM as well.
Yeah, right. So great to see you. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. We got a little bit of a late start, but I got to say, so for 2022, I guess we're in 2022. Obviously, you're talking about the Windows stuff. Any other big things that you're hoping to accomplish in 2022 that you can share with us without giving away too many trade secrets?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see desktop getting closer to what we're trying to do in the Tanzu space, really focusing on the modern application developer and focusing on how do we make it super easy to get productive when working in a modern apps containerization type of space that's going to potentially have a Kubernetes endpoint. So I know like the Tanzu team has done a lot of great stuff with Tanzu Community Edition and having a lot of the data center components, instead of having proprietary, they've been moving to open source. And I think that's a fantastic thing that's going to help. So on the desktop, we want to make that as seamless as possible and make it so that everybody gets familiar with it, because it's so much beyond what we're doing with vanilla Kubernetes and managed Kubernetes. It really takes the best of the open source community and packages it all up. So we're very eager about that. I'm hoping that we can get some progress on the Windows stuff. If Microsoft doesn't change their licensing around, we'll have to make a call around, are we going to call this official support, or are we going to issue potentially some flings that have drivers that, if you want to play games on it, go party down, don't recommend running your business on it. We have to make that call as we go, but the work is being done on the technology side at the very least. And thankfully we have the ESXi on ARM team who's in a similar boat. They want to be able to support Windows workloads as well.
I meant to ask you before. Sorry, I meant to ask you. We spun off from Dell, right? And given that we've spun off for Dell, has this impacted the way you guys look at, or is that really just an afterthought? And that what we're really going after is where the market's going?
The latter. I mean, I wouldn't say that the Dell thing ever got into my way, other than some folks who were in adjacent functions. Some of their time would have been spent doing Dell GTM go to market stuff. So yeah, they never got in our way. And I remember actually when we got acquired back in the before times, I met Michael and Pat there was a on-site thing, and Pat Gelsinger brought Michael Dell around, and I got to introduce myself and say hello and met him a couple times. But after that, but when I met, I was like, hey, like I run the Mac product here. Are we cool?
Right.
And even at the time, he was like, love what you're doing. Keep doing it. We're not getting in your way. Keep marching forward. So we're really fortunate that none of that, we got to fly underneath all of that politics and all of that, big horse trading stuff happening at the top layer.
Good to know. So Windows, and you'll track the Windows, and engineers might just go for whatever fling is out there just because that's the environment they want to support, right? Or run on. So that'd be cool. Even if you get stuck, it would be good to get that stuff out there so that if you do want to run Windows for whatever reason, or Fusion for whatever reason with a Windows, OS, you can. Any other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year we had we released a free version. We had a .2, if you will. And so this year, we're really trying to think about, what value does Fusion and Workstation bring to the market, and what do we expect out of that from a remuneration perspective. So I'm not saying that we're going to do pricing and packaging changes, but We're really thinking about what the future of these products do and why they are beneficial to our customers who use them generally to augment what they're doing on the vSphere side of the house, or they're doing them to work sort of in isolation in the sandbox, right? So, if one question came up like, well, are you guys going to do workstation for ARM devices? Am I going to be able to put workstation on my Raspberry Pi? Maybe, probably not this year. But I definitely think that, Linux, ARM, workstation makes a lot of sense as the technology and the operating system and the ecosystem starts to evolve and things like that. But yeah, I'm excited for this year. There's some stuff I'm obviously not allowed to share that we're keeping close to the chest, but I'm very happy that a lot of the issues that we had from previous years have all been kind of smoothed out, and we got a lot of runway now.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited is Michael Roy for the 2022 season coming up? 1 being very, very, very depressed, and 10 being like super best year ever. Where are you landing?
I'm an optimist, so I'm shooting for 8.5, 9. At the same time, I'm a pragmatist, so I leave a little bit of room for who knows what. Because honestly, who could have predicted COVID? And I think if nothing else, it's shown us to hedge your bets and to really think about how can you bring empathy into the world? How can you make people's lives better more so than how do we chase the dollar? And if we keep that in the forefront, everything else, it might be tricky to figure out the right path forward, but that's where our North Star is.
I saw a meme this morning that it was like, who could have guessed 2021? Wow, who could have guessed COVID? And then 2022, they look up at the moon and it has like a dented, like the Death Star dent.
Don't look up.
22, who knows, right? Michael Roy, we always do at the end of the show. Thanks for listening to the end of the show. Everybody that's still here, we do a little bit of vBarbecue because we live stream this on youtube.com/vBarbecue. Go over there and check us out. We always ask everybody, and I will bring Corey Romero back in because I know he's been doing a little bit of barbecue. We have Tony Foster. So we'll start, I guess we'll start with Corey, but Michael, think about what is your favorite barbecue or what do you like to do? Corey, you got any barbecue for us?
I'm going to cook a brisket this weekend. My trick to the brisket, and I've had professional barbecuers disagree with me, but they haven't tasted it. So I smoke my brisket. I started at 180 degrees, my smoker, and I let it run until the meat hits about 165 degrees. There's going to be a really long stall in there, about a 6, 7, even 8-hour stall, as the liquid gets compressed and the cold or temperature stays in the center of the meat. But let it push through, and then as soon as it gets to about 165, 168, I will turn it up a hair until it's 180 degrees. It is the best brisket I've ever had. The seasoning I use are Traeger seasonings. Not personally a fan of Traeger. I do own a Traeger, but my next smoker is going to be a different brand. But the best rub I use is there's a Traeger beef rub and a Traeger. It's not brisket. It's let's see. I've got it up here. Beef rub and the prime rib rub. Those two together, best flavor ever.
All right, there you go. Brisket. I'm going to come over to Utah, get some.
Hey, come on out.
Michael Roy, any favorite barbecue?
Oh man, I'm going to Utah. For me, I'm going to be a little contrarian here. I'm an apartment liver, and while we were up in Canada, it was a little too snowy to break out the barbecue, unfortunately. So we were doing the oven, but I figured out how to do pork chops in this ridiculously good way with an air fryer, and they are by far the best pork chops I've ever had. Trick is, you do a rub, paprika, garlic salt, garlic powder, whatever, onion salt, maybe a little bit of rosemary or thyme, something like that if you want to jazz it. Pepper, not nothing crazy, and then put the air fryer at about 400. Rub that up, and then you add a little bit of brown sugar. You put the brown sugar on like the fatty part of the pork, and close that thing maybe 15 minutes, 16 minutes ish, depending on how sort of black you want the fatty to be. Whew.
I will have to try that. We have an air fryer. We picked one up about 6 months ago. One of these ones that folds up on a cabinet. It's like it folds back down, and we do all kinds of things with it. It's a very, very good utilitarian device, right? You can make a lot of things with it. So yeah, I'll have to try pork chops. Awesome.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
Tony Foster. Tony Foster, I know you're on the call. I don't know if you have any barbecue, but I thought I'd ask.
I do. I haven't done anything unique and weird in a while, so I need to do that. But KC strips here about a week ago turned out absolutely phenomenal. I pre-soak my KC strips in beer, which releases a lot of the juices and flavors in them, and it comes out great.
What's a KC strip?
It's a steak.
Oh, okay. Right.
It's a really good cut of steak. Yeah.
I did not know. I have to go Google KC strip. New York strip.
Kansas City strip.
City strip. I guess that's from Kansas City. Our boy down there in Kansas City. All right,
yes, indeed.
We're 1 over past the top of the hour. Michael Roy, thanks for coming by and giving us all things ARM and Mac, and we're looking forward to it. I will be playing with my Mac and engaging with that. And if you're considering getting a Mac, I would say the M1s are amazing. Go check them out. Get one. You'll have a lot of fun. It's a great toy. Till then, we'll be back again next week. We got scheduled for the next, I think, 6 weeks of guests coming out. So welcome to 2022. We'll be back again next week. See you then. Have a great rest of your day.